It is my pleasure to introduce today's panel on corporate capture of development, public-private partnerships, and global resistance. This panel is DAWN's second panel in this year's CSW. We are very happy to present part of our research that we have been conducting with peers in Africa, Latin America, and Asia on specific PPP cases developing in different sectors of the development world. So we're thinking, or our research has been looking at public-private partnerships as they have evolved in infrastructure projects, as well as in the health sector throughout the Global South, with a specific feminist lens, as much as DAWN's work has been characterized over the years. We're very happy today to be presenting 3 of the cases, of the 10 cases that we have been developing through the past year and a bit. Today we will explore the cases of Ghana, of India, and Mexico, and we will have 5 stellar presenters focusing on each of the cases. First, we will have the case of Ghana presented by Gertrude Chifa Tokive and Silvia Eugene Marfo from the University of Ghana. Then we'll have the Mexican case presented by Isabel Clavijo Flores and Julieta Lamberti from Poder. And the third case will be the case of India, presented by Sulakshana Nandi from the Public Health Resource Network in Chhattisgarh. But before we go into the cases, we will also be having an introduction about DAWN's work on PPPs and corporate capture of development, presented by Corina Rodriguez Enriquez, who is part of DAWN's executive committee. And we will close the panel with Maria Jose Romero, who will be joining us as a discussant, bringing her experience and Eurodat's work, an analytical framework on PPPs and how it observes and understands and appreciates the work that we have been carrying out through this year. And before I give the word to Corina, I wanted to share with you just the way our research looks right now. Today, this panel is the first chance, or is our chance to present this year's or the most recent DAWN Informs, which is a periodical that DAWN has been producing for decades now. And this time, DAWN Informs is focused on PPPs and women's human rights. And we will have this document available for all as the panel progresses. Today, we're presenting 3 cases of a longer list of cases, which you can see here, that include Senegal, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, cases from Kenya, Peru, Zimbabwe, Fiji. So this is just a taster of a longer project with a larger reach and also much depth to each of the cases. So we hope you will read it, that you will refer to this work, and that it will help you move forward with your own advocacy as we resist the corporate capture of development. So first we'll have Corina Rodriguez Enrique. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This virtual CSW gives us the opportunity to join from different parts of the world in the different time zones. You are all very welcome to this event, and I want to thank you for joining us. And I also want to start by thanking the authors of the case studies that we have been conducted within this DAWN's project, the ones who are here in the panel, but also the ones that have developed the other cases that you can read about in the DAWN forms that Masaya has just shared with us. And I would also like to thank, before starting, to the DAWN's team, to my colleague Masaya, who has been a wonderful support and a great support in this project, and also to the comms team that have done a great work putting this panel together, as well as the secretariat. DAWN secretariat is located in Fiji. It is, I don't know what time in the middle of the night in Fiji right now. So maybe they will not know until tomorrow that we are really very, very thankful for all their support. So I will give a very brief introduction, basically to locate the cases within DAWN's broader work. The cases that we will present are part of DAWN's work linked to our concern with what we call, or what is called, the corporate capture of development. And as an introduction to the cases themselves, I will elaborate a little bit on this idea, on how the interest on public-private partnerships, on PPPs, fit in this broader umbrella, as well as on the framework that we developed to look at PPPs specifically from a feminist lens. In the current phase of concentration and financialization of global capital, private corporations have increasingly gained a position of power over other actors. In many regions, and this is true for the global south, but also in the north, corporations are able to impose their own agendas based on their continuous search for larger profits. And in this way, private actors have increasingly come to subordinate public and collective interest, this diminishing the ability, the capacity of the state to regulate them, and in this way also threatening human rights and challenging labor, environmental, and other law regulations and standards, including, for example, taxation. And we would also like to highlight that this advance of the private sector, understood as big multinational corporations mainly, they have even colonized multilateral institutions, as the international financial institutions, the World Trade Organization, and even the UN. The influence of corporate power has grown and is evident in the setting of priorities, in the orientation of policy proposals, and in the weakening of potential regulatory processes. For example, talking about the UN, the private sector and its champions have pushed for the relatively mild UN guiding principles on business and human rights in preference to the tougher proposed Biden Treaty on transnational corporations with respect to human rights, just as an example of this colonization of private interest even in the UN. This corporate capture of institutions of the state has systemic and long-standing influence and is backed by narratives that argue, first, that the states are, through process of rent-seeking, inherently economically inefficient. It is given that the states are inefficient. And second, that policy issues are of such technical complexity that ordinary citizens cannot understand and therefore should not or need not engage with them. This inference often drawn from the inference often drawn from this is that private corporations operates in the public interest. What is good for corporation is claimed to be self-evidently good for the state and its citizens. For example, in many of our countries where we have extended unemployment problems and employment problems, corporations are highlighted as the ones who have the capacity to create new jobs. In a kind of a bizarre inversion operation, workers and the state are seen as the ones who should be thankful that corporations are putting their resources into creating these jobs, rather than understanding how it is through the exploitation of the workforce and the advantageous use of the public policies platform that corporations secure their profits. So we need to dispute and challenge this narrative that legitimizes corporate capture, and this is one of the goals of this project. The current avatar for corporate capture of the state is public-private partnerships, and we understand the push for public-private partnerships of PPPs as a renewed phase of a long-standing process of privatization. The push of PPPs is underpinned by a kind of perverse logic. First, there is this fiscal pressure due to the race to the bottom in taxation, to the many uses that corporations take advantage of to avoid paying taxes, to the big amount of illicit financial flows. So we have states losing resources, and then we have the need of austerity policies to get fiscal equilibrium that limit states' capacity to provide for public needs. And then the states need, it appears, the need of private investment in order to guarantee infrastructure and social provisioning. So PPPs have been presented within this context as part of the strategy to move from billions in ODA to trillions in investment. And this strategy has been framed within the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Addis Ababa Agenda for Action on Financing for Development. There, it was agreed that the mechanisms used to generate the capital needed to deliver the 2030 Agenda would need to go beyond international aid, beyond ODA, to include finance available from governments directly and through private sector investment. At the same time, the World Bank announced a new strategy called Maximizing Finance for Development, and we have learned a lot about this from Maria Jose and Eurodad. And this strategy claim good leverage solutions and connect and coordinate the public and private sectors. From the private sector perspective, the profitability of the projects that are aligned in the pipelines for PPPs is crucial for their plans to make sense. Depending on the sector and the location, PPPs represent a very attractive business opportunity for companies such as those in the construction sector, engineering company, but also service providers. For example, healthcare service providers, and also for banks. The delivery of infrastructure projects traditionally carried out by the public sector represents nowadays the next frontier to be conquered by the public sector. But together with this positive narrative on PPPs, together with the idea that we need the private sector involved through these PPPs in financing for development, in financing the 2030 development agenda, there is also a growing critique that has emerged that basically looks at what really happened with PPPs in practice, what happens with PPPs in the field. And briefly, this critique highlights that PPPs are more costly. They have turned out to be more costly than traditional public investment for governments in the long run. And this is because the conditions set up in PPPs contracts usually imply heavier financial costs than those arising from direct government borrowing. Thanks, Masaya. I will wrap up in the next 5 minutes. And the cost is even heavier in the case of developing countries where investors expect higher returns to compensate for presumed higher risks. The other critique is that PPPs are not always more efficient, and that they are really more efficient. And when they are more efficient, it is mostly due to the existence of a consolidated framework to manage PPPs. They seem to be more efficient where the state is more efficient as well. And there is also a growing critique on the fact that PPPs restrict citizens' access to services and challenge the quality of these services, thereby threatening people's rights. Poor regulations of PPPs has also resulted in serious social and environmental damages, and PPPs are highly controversial when it comes to transparency and accountability. And we will learn from the case study about all these issues that we can really verify in the field. So just to finish, the cases DAWN carried out try to nurture this critique, and mostly to nurture the incipient feminist critique to PPPs. And for that, we developed an intersectional feminist approach to PPPs. And in this sense, our guiding question is not only or just how PPPs affect differently women and men. What we develop is a framework that aims to produce a comprehensive analysis, and that include to look at the context where PPPs are carried out, something like the political economy of PPPs in each region and in each country. We also focus on the actors involved and in a kind of power analysis, and you will see it in the cases. Of course, IFIs are very relevant actors, and mainly the World Bank, and it's really striking how we see this in every case. Of course, the public sector is the other main actor, and in many cases, the public sector act aligned with IFIs and the private sector. The private sector is, of course, the other relevant actor, but we also find other actors like the academic sector that both nurture the narrative on favor of the PPPs or can become a leader critique of this process, and social organizations, women organizations, feminist organizations, trade unions, who also act resisting or in some cases allowing for these processes to happen. We also focus on the regulatory and legal frameworks that in many cases explains this obscure shape of the PPPs. And of course, we try to look at the gender and human rights impacts. We looked at the transparency and accountability issues, and we also focus, and we have very nice examples in the cases that we are presented today. We have also looked at the resistances, and yes, I'm finishing. Women's resistances are really key, and it is one more women's body who is that are there challenging this new phase of privatization. So with this, I invite you to hear to the cases. There are 3 examples of the 10 that we develop, but they really teach us a lot about how PPPs work in practice, and which is the big challenge that we face from a feminist perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corina, for introducing the panel so strongly, and also for introducing DAWN's framework as we approach the issue of PPPs. I now give the floor to your Churchifa Torviki, and Silvia Ohene-Marfo, who will present the case of Ghana today. The floor is yours.
Hello. I can't hear anything.
Oh, you can't hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I will share my screen. Okay, it's good afternoon here in Ghana. Sylvia Marfo and I have worked in the local market in Accra, looking at the public-private partnership projects in the market. And that is what we are focusing on right now. So Ghana, we have a history of privatization spanning from the 1980s. So that history also has something to do with the conditionalities of loans. So financing model is one of the issues that circumscribe what we went through historically. So we did a lot of privatization from the 1980s. State-owned industries were privatized. At the same time, we had high debt. So the question had been that we are doing this because we didn't have money and we have to agree to the conditions. In 2011, Ghana had the National Ppp Policy. When you look at the policy, it has given weight to kind of arguments that PPPs will help us develop. But behind the scenes, we have, at the same time, we have the high sovereign bond debt to pay, and we just transitioned into middle income status in 2007 after rebasing of our economy. So that meant that we did not have access to certain kinds of concessional loans in the market. So the government will argue that they will have to still develop. So while going for more expensive loans, they will have to use other tools for development. So that has been the argument. So PPPs have come as a development tool from the government's perspective to develop the nation. So we'll be using PPPs mainly for very capital intensive projects for a very long time. As far as since 1990s, in the energy sector, for instance, we will be having PPPs. The construction of harbor or maintenance of harbors, we'll be having PPPs. But the new trend is the PPPs in informalized sectors like markets. And that is what is a new thing. The PPPs themselves are not new because we have them for almost 30 years in different forms. So, so this is what we have here. At the national level, this 2019 national level PPPs by sector, you will see that the social and health sectors are 56% of all the projects, 32 projects that were listed on the Ministry of Finance's website. These are followed by transport and industry, water and waste. But within this sector, the social and health sector, we have markets as the most. So out of the 18 projects in the social and health sector, markets are the half of that. And that's surprising because the way that our markets operate, they're very informal. So one will not expect that finance will be, capital will be interested in the way they are, because the markets are also very small, individual, atomistic, but they generate a lot of revenue nonetheless. So this is what we have now. So we have to understand from the Ghanaian context what market mean for women and the states. So in the local market, this is how our markets look like, and this is our study site. You will see that just this one umbrella here is somebody's enterprise. This one enterprise, this another enterprise. And you will see that these are spaces for women's socioeconomic and political expression. It's also a space for the accumulation and survival strategies. They use market for several things, including their political expression. Okay, and these spaces are also inherited. So you have mothers to daughters, aunties to nieces. And so you can see a generation of women using one space, which they have created and held down traditionally. Okay. But then we also see that the space has is individual. You create your space, but within the market structure, the local government may own the land and also extract rent from the women, the users, so mainly women. So the markets are also very important for the state because of tax. And for the central government, to the local government revenue, for instance, the markets will be very important, especially because the local government do not have a lot of cash. The state does not give it adequate funds to run, although their roads will be expanding from maintenance of roads to even building schools. So they need to develop their the local areas. So markets will be very important for this. But at the same time, the markets are also underdeveloped and congested. So the argument is that we will need to develop the markets, modernize them to make more money, and also to make the environment clean and neater. So that has been that's the context in which the PPPs come in. So what are PPPs supposed to be doing in this market? So you will see that this market, where we did our study, is called the DAWN market. It is in the Greater Accra region. It's mainly a food market that was initiated by women themselves. They are very small scale trading, mainly under umbrellas and stores and little containers. You can see the things they sell. But the women own the structures, and the municipal assembly takes daily tolls or yearly business operating permit from the women. So that has been the structure. But then the PPP shops, we will see them soon. It came in from 2013. It started as the construction of new shops in the market started as a World Bank urban development grant, which started lockable shops in the market. So the first set of PPPs started on top of those structures. So the first structures were not PPPs, but then the subsequent ones started as PPP. So it started expanding, PPP started expanding in the market in that way. So these are the PPP shops. They are lockable, they are larger, they have better spacing and well laid out, which ordinarily should appeal to everybody who knows that our markets are congested and fire outbreaks very rampant. So you want a market structure like that. So this PPP lockable shops were built with build, operate, transfer model, where the financiers will operate them for 20 years and hand them over to the assembly. So it is the Ministry of Assembly and the financiers that are the parties in this. And then the financiers, arbitrary selection of 7 financiers, all male and Ghanaians. In all, there were 209 shops with varied sizes. So the processes that led to these PPPs coming to the market have been questioned by the women and even the assembly members, some of them. The first was the limited engagement with the women, the traders in the market, the original traders in the market. So they describe it as more informational rather than consultative. So it looked like it was imposed on them. So the process itself also led to the dispossession and displacement of traders who used to do their little and umbrella store container kind of trading in this space that the markets, the PPPs now occupy. There's also lack of transparency because the women did not know that after the shops are built, they were not told how much they will go for. So there was a little disregard for suggestions from the market women. There was for instance, the women argued, for instance, that with the kind of things they sell, tomatoes, onion in small quantities, they will not need large stores like this. They may not even need lockable shops, but they will need open space sheds. However, those were ignored and the PPPs were built nonetheless. So we will see that these things came in clandestinely and also disregard the existing traditional trading structures in the market. The other part is the PPP stores. So when another batch of PPP sheds came in, this one were not lockable. They took into consideration the women's suggestion. However, they are also going to be paid for 10 years. So you have to have a large sum of money to pay for 10 good years. And the women found the cost structure to be a problem, and the payment itself also triggered a series of collective actions at different levels. So for instance, the women protested that they will not be able to pay, they can't afford. So there was negotiation and dialogue at various levels. So from the assembly, the women demonstrated, the cases traveled, they used different levels of engagement from the assembly to the presidency. But during the period, you see the political intervention, the MP of the area trying to say that, okay, I will subsidize, so I'll pay a certain amount for each of you. But the women knew that this is not sustainable, so they stood their ground. So the women, for instance, will say, how do we expect an onion seller to raise this sum of money? We will not pay, we can't afford, we will vote against the MP. And the MP today, that party, the party that was in power at the time the women were protesting is still there, and the women threatened to show the government. So the long and short of the story is the resistance that the women mounted was the bringing back the states to development. So what the women insisted that they will not pay for the stores, and then went into this dialogue and the negotiation and the class action against the state led to the state coming back So currently, as we are presenting now, this is the current structures which the state itself is funding. It started in 2019, I think, because of COVID, it could have finished, but because of COVID, it's not yet done. It's new 500 store shares started in 2020. It's state funded and to be allocated to the traders. You are only going to pay registration fee, and you are not renting, but you will be paying the daily tolls as it used to be. So the size and design is also based on suggestions of the traders. So we see that through this process, the traders also continue to mobilize funds to insensitize workers on site, because they knew that the political circle can jeopardize the process. And so they're able to talk about alternative model, which is the state and the women working in league to make sure that these structures, 500 of them, are coming on stream. So the key reflections from this study is this: that one, the PPP model that came to market led to the foreignization of the market. I'm talking about foreignization not for nationality or identity issues, but for the mere fact that the women who got shops in the market, the lockable shops, are not the original traders in the market, but women who traded in other markets, bigger market like the Makola market, accumulated so much money to expand their trade. So they came in to take multiple shops in the market. So we interviewed many people, and you find one woman from Makola who will rent like 3, a son operating one, then the daughter operating another, and then a nephew operating the other. So there's also, the process also led to the fragmentation of the women leadership in the market, and which has also weakened solidarity among the traders. We have a strong leadership, commodity-led leadership in the market. So we have Tomato Traders Association, we have Onion Traders Association, but they all fall under one umbrella body called the Government Market Traders Association. But that has been fragmented because of this. And we also see that men, because of the way the PPPs are structured, men are now mediating women's economic future, because you will need to pass through a man to get the shops. And the shops are for men. They built them for 20 years. So we have middlemen now taking these shops and going to town to further commodify them. We also see emerging changes in ownership and control of trading spaces and structures. So we have already talked about the traditional structure where the women own the spaces, but the state takes the tax. What we are seeing now is that now the state owns the structures. The women no longer own structures, although we still have women who own the structures. So systematically, if the state start coming in, we will not know what will happen, especially in terms of partisanship, who will qualify to trade in those markets. So they are concerned about partisanship and patronage in the allocation of the shops. But the bigger story about this unfolding saga is how women mobilize around the small. They are mobilized around the small because when the lockable shops started, there was little resistance. But the small, which affected a lot of women, help women to mobilize, to bring the state back to the market, to develop it, because in any case, the state takes tax, extract tax from the women, and it has obligations towards the women in the market. So that is the structure of the PPPs in the market and how women are experiencing them. But we are experiencing a comeback, a state comeback, but it also has implications for ownership and women's economic survival going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shifa. Sorry for interrupting a little bit. We're running short of time. So thanks very much for presenting this case, which is very, very rich in detail. And I invite everyone to read the case in the DI and the DAWN forms that we will have available within the files of the webinar or the parallel event, sorry. Before we move forward, I also wanted to let everybody know that because of the format of the CSW, we cannot open the floor for questions, not the mic for questions. So questions and comments can be made at the chat box, and we will be sure to bring them to the conversation at the end of the presentations. So now we move forward to the presentation by Isabel Clavijo Flores and Julieta Lamberti, who will be presenting the case in Mexico. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Well, it is a pleasure to be participating in this panel. We thank you, Corina, Masaya, and all the DAWN colleagues who have organized it for inviting us to present. Well, as Masaya said, recently we will present the highlights of the research we conducted on a PPP project implemented by the Mexican government in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec region in southern Mexico. Well, I will begin by briefly describing the context in which the project we are investigating has been implemented. And then Isabel will present the characteristic of the project, its territorial impacts, and its effects primarily on women human rights defenders in the region. Well, the context in Mexico is marked by the presidency of Andrés Manuel López Obrador now. He was elected president for a progressive coalition led by the Morena party with the highest number of votes for a presidential candidate in Mexico's history. So AMLO took office in December 2018, and his presidency came with the hope he could bring a regime change that would stop privileging the neoliberal political economic elite that have been ruling the country for the last 3 decades, but about the imposition of large projects in indigenous and communal territories, things doesn't seem to have changed much concerning the neoliberal period. And for example, Alfonso Romo, the chief of the presidential office, has been accused of hoarding water and polluting it in the Yucatan Peninsula. Also, Romo in the last 2 years was making lobby to ban the glyphosate prohibition, and so that companies that pollute the environment wouldn't be prosecuted. Also, the information about the president's frequent meetings with Mexican business leaders was kept hidden for the citizenship. Well, the fourth transformation, as they like to call themselves, has presented itself as the first government with a parity cabinet and legislature in history. However, in terms of concrete policies to end violence against women and advance in recognition of our sexual and reproductive rights, the government has done a little or nothing. So since last year, when the march and the women's strike were the largest in history, as we can see in the first picture, more than 100,000 of women marched last year in the Women's Day, but the president has done nothing but ignore and even denigrate the feminist movement. So it is like that. Morena is now proposing a candidate for governor to a person with several criminal complaints about harassment. As you can see in the second picture, it is a projection made by a feminist group the night before the Women March 2 weeks ago. It is a projection in Palacio Nacional, the place where the president lives, and says a rapist won't be a governor. Well, finally, the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, the already situation for women in Mexico is difficult, but has been worse by the pandemic, with a massive exit of women from labor markets due to the increased reproductive and care work. Domestic violence has increased due to confinement. Also, the spaces for community organization and women's participation have been significantly restricted, although the companies and PPP projects that affect their territories have not stopped their operations. All mega projects promoted by the federal government, some of them managed through PPPs, as we will see below, were declared essential during the pandemic and haven't stopped during the pandemic. However, the government agencies' transparency obligations were suspended for more than 6 months. And during this period, it was impossible to know the progress and any activity or public expenditure made by the government to advance the mega projects. And in this challenging context, the research of the Interosseonic Corridor case was carried out. And well, I directed the research project, but Isabel made all the hard work and she was the principal author of the paper. So I leave you with her. She tells us about the characteristics of the research and of the case of the Mexican case. Isa, I leave the word to you.
Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, morning to all my colleagues and the audience. I'm going to share my screen too. Okay. As Julieta mentioned, the Interoceanic Corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is a mega project proposed by the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador that focuses on the construction of infrastructure and energy projects. This Mexican region joins the territories of Oaxaca and Veracruz and has an historical, geopolitical, and economic interest because it is the only point in Mexico that joins the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans in a distance of 200 kilometers. These territories, in addition to being indigenous and peasant, form an ecosystem of great relevance due to its biodiversity and hydrology. In Mexico, PPPs have been implemented considering that they are the necessary formula to solve the state's inability to administer and offer public goods and services. This was the result of a context of economic liberalization and privatization in Latin America. The first PPP model was in 1995, aimed at the infrastructure and energy sector. And in 2002, a unified regulatory framework was formulated, the first public-private partnership law. Currently, Mexico is part of the Global Agreement 2030 agenda that has promoted the implementation of PPPs in Latin America through multi-stakeholders alliances. However, this approach has not guaranteed its success and has generated territorial conflicts because it transferred to the private sector rights over public resources. Also, the Latin American experience indicates that PPPs can favor the corporate capture of a state, which means that an economic elite make public policy decisions for private benefit. In fact, Mexican state has recognized that the hidden problems of PPPs are that private requirement of profitability affect public finances. The Interoceanic Corridor is considered an historical PPP announced with the presentation of a development program for the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. The corridor works as a free zone, a format that arranges the territory based on a notion of development anchored to economic growth, mainly through foreign investment. There are two main projects: the rehabilitation of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec Railway and Jaltipan-Salina Cruz gas pipeline. Both involve rehabilitation, operation, design, construction, and maintenance. The railway has currently been tendered to 6 private companies, and the gas pipeline is in the process of being awarded under the concession scheme. In both cases, the private companies will be the ones that build, maintain, and operate the services. The corridor could affect the ecosystems of the isthmus by favoring the consolidation of more extractive projects. In the region are important areas for the conservation of birds, forests, endemic fauna, and priority hydrological regions. By August from last year, the complete environmental information and authorization have not been published. In this region live more than 100,000 indigenous inhabitants. Currently, this project doesn't have their consent. Communities denounce that government's regional consultative reunions aren't their legitimate decision-making mechanisms. And on April of 2019, women human rights defenders in Veracruz expressed that the consultations were held without ensuring that the representatives were adequately informed. Also, women haven't been included or informed on how the mega project will affect them. In government words, the program seeks to promote a new way of seeing development. However, did not start from a discussion between institutions and communities about their living conditions. The way in which the mega project has been designed fosters and maintains relations of domination over territories and population, and doesn't include in any way the context of particular conflict for women. Also, since it is configured from a power relationship that imposes the notion of welfare based on the success of private investment and economic growth directed at the extractive sector, it doesn't allow for a critical participation by communities, and even less so by women. In other words, the mega project is essentially formulated so this doesn't happen because its structural components have not been discussed and are designed from the top down. The vision of women who are currently struggling against mining and energy extraction in the region is not compatible with the PPP scheme. Women defenders in the region are proposing an agenda in which rights to health, education, food, water, and environmental protection are fundamental issues. It's necessary to transform the way in which development has been conceived, and communities should participate and define economic agendas and public policy decisions. To conclude, we want to share the words from the women of the Proceso de Articulación de la Sierra de Santa Marta in Veracruz, an organization of women defending their territory against the imposition of this mega project and collaborators in this research. I am only going to mention a few phrases because of the time. In the last years, mega projects have increased patriarchal violence, propitiated by organized crime, and spread throughout society as new culture that affects from the family to all spheres of social life. Women are determined not to give a drop of water to these projects of death. It is important to recognize indigenous African-Mexican peasant women's struggles for local control of productive processes and reproduction of life, access to land tenure, and decision-making in their communities. They have a political commitment to transform the civilizing process for a new system of life that recognizes that everything is interconnected to nature and spirituality. And finally, we want to invite you to check the interactive map, illustrating all the information that is in Poder's website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. You were perfect with time. I was even surprised, still trying to give you an extra few seconds. So thank you so much. I highly recommend to check out the map. I think one of the highlights of the case in Mexico is the way it maps out in the territory. And our peers at Poder have done a very strong work in terms of mapping this process. So check that out in their website, and also check it out in our DAWN Informs that is now available as part of this event. We now move to a very different type of PPP. We will be exploring India's case, which focused on the health sector with research led by Sulakshana Nandi. Sulakshana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Matsaya. Do let me know if my voice goes in between. Yeah, because I have variable internet. So I will be presenting the case study that I was involved in on the impact of public-private partnerships through publicly funded health insurance schemes on women in India, with special reference to Chhattisgarh, which is where I live. So to start off, I just want to say that, this is, I want to acknowledge that this is all a collective work, and it's really not me as an individual. So a lot of the research that I'm presenting has been done, by me as part of the larger team within the Public Health Resource Network, and also acknowledging the work with community health workers involved in anti-privatization struggles, and also as an activist and campaigner of the People's Health Movement. So I'll just straight away get into the history of the publicly funded health insurance schemes in India. And today I'll be speaking specifically about the set of schemes, insurance schemes that were introduced from the early 2000s, and mainly for the unorganized sector in India, and which engaged the private sector in a big way, for the first time. So initially in early 2000s, a few states introduced health insurance schemes. And in 2007, at the national level, the National Health Insurance Scheme, or the RSBY, was initiated for the unorganized sector, targeting people below the poverty line, who require hospital care. And like I said, it drew extensively from the private healthcare providers. So this scheme was subsequently expanded in 2018 by the current government, by the current NDA government. So the scheme is now called PMJY, which expands in English to the Prime Minister's People's Health Scheme, introduced under the Ayushman Bharat reforms. And the PMJY basically really expanded the scheme and increased insurance coverage per household. However, many consider it the largest PPPs in health initiated by the Indian government, and I'll go on to describe it. So what is different about this new scheme that is currently being implemented in India? So the design of the scheme has been the same as the previous schemes. However, the differences in the emphasis. While the early insurance schemes, such as the National Insurance Scheme, was just considered as one of the many government health programs, the PMJY is actively promoted as the main and only health program of the National Democratic Alliance government. And all other health initiatives have been relegated to a lesser position. So it is proclaimed that, and wrongly so, as the world's largest government-funded healthcare program. And media also started calling it, Modi Care, after the Prime Minister's name. So it has a lot of it's been promoted a lot in that way. And as we'll see, prioritizing this has had serious implications for the public health system. So the design of, I will not go much into the design of this scheme, because I want to actually speak more on the sort of the narrative and the discourse around this scheme and how it got initiated, and also the impact on women. So the design of this scheme, basically it covers poor and vulnerable families based on the government survey. And in some states, this federal scheme has been universalized by states using some of the money, their own money, and private and public hospitals are empaneled to provide the services, and the medical packages mainly cover inpatient care. And the stated objectives of these schemes have always been mainly to reduce financial burden on the poor, and also ensure their access to quality health services, provide the beneficiaries the power to choose from a network of providers, and to provide cashless and paperless service to the people. But what's important to understand is, what is the underlying and sometimes quite explicit narrative, and how it also links to the global narratives that have provided the opportunity for such PPPs to be implemented. So the first thing has been the concept of new universalism, which came around late 1999 or so, which says that in provision of healthcare, ownership and the nature of the provider does not matter, and instead efficiency, quality, competition, and provisioning were the keys. So it basically subsequently it was expanded to also say that the state needs to play a stewardship role rather than a provider role, and and its role basically being as a leader and a regulator and a financer. And as Corina also mentioned in the introduction, the multilateral institutions too got sort of promoted this kind of narrative, and the World Health Report of the WHO in 2000 cemented this articulation. And subsequently, this articulation has also been advanced under the universal health coverage discourse. And so these are seen as mechanisms for strategic purchasing that would that supposedly would regulate providers and private, especially the private sector, with the government playing that role rather, and most of the provision happening through the private sector and government playing the regulation role only. And we also see, many LMIC similar arguments and narratives have been built, around UHC, and most of the current privatization initiatives are being undertaken under the paradigm of strategic purchasing for UHC under the pretext of achieving efficiency and quality by opening the door to competition for the providers and choice for the people. Additionally, this discourse also included criticism of the public provision of health services and a clear faith in the effectiveness of market-based healthcare provisioning, and basically a pursuing of the neoliberal ideology. And this has actually been documented through studies that have been done on the emergence and the genesis of such schemes in India. So it was said that choice to the patients will ensure accountability, and the IT systems which this whole scheme is supposed to be based on will take care of fraud, and market competition will take care of rest. So in India, at the country level, this was aided also by liberalized policies, growth of the private healthcare markets, changes in regulation of the private health insurance, and technological advancement. So when we look at, what has been the difference in organizing and financing of healthcare under the insurance schemes from what is being done through the government's own health system. So first thing, under the health insurance scheme, it's explicitly sort of marketed as a business model, as an impetus to the health sector industry. Secondly, like I had said before, it's government who is purchasing from the private and the public. And there is contractual agreements between the government, insurance companies, and the hospitals located within a particular framework. Now, one of the biggest changes that has happened in the current scheme from the previous ones has been the institution of a national health authority, which was set up with an autonomous board, which is supposed to be the purchasing agency, which is going to purchase, I say purchase with quotes, so purchase, these services from the private sector. And it is independent of the health ministry, and many critiques really consider it as an unconstitutional body, as it was formed through an executive order and not an act of parliament. And it legitimizes the role for profit, private sector and government policy making, and opens the door for corporate capture. The board has corporate body members, and there's also possibilities of conflict of interest being created in that. So creation of this sort of institute, this authority, sort of bypassing the ministry in order to implement this huge program, which is clearly the big priority of the government, has really opened up partnerships with the private sector and institutions such as the World Bank. And there's explicit involvement, I mean, their offices are in the same building. The World Bank employees write their policy notes, but do not disclose their affiliations. They're writing as NHA. And I think the defining feature is also, and we see that, I think, for many PPPs, I think we've also heard, is non-transparency and non-accountability to the public. So when finally you look at the data of this insurance scheme, something which is being paid by public funds, something which is paid by our tax taken from us, however, hardly any data has been made available for public scrutiny, but they are available to the World Bank employees, etc. So the experience of women accessing, utilizing the scheme and implications have been in terms of, a lot of concerns regarding the availability of health services, acceptability and affordability. And it's sort of the scheme, in addition to the number of barriers that women already face in accessing healthcare, this has like enrollment into the scheme has again, or having an ID, citizenship ID has again led to one another barrier. And while the hospitalization rates are higher for women, however, the circumstances and the utility for the utilization, raises many concerns. Even for those who are enrolled, they're often unable to use this scheme. And we also see that there is, overutilization. When you actually look at what things are being utilized, overutilization of the scheme on a very small set of services, and the private sector is able to provide narrow and selective services and cherry pick what they want. And we've seen the pattern of unnecessary operations such as hysterectomies come up again and again in the last many years since these schemes have been implemented, and we still see that today. And also things like high cesarean section rates, etc. The biggest impact, and contrary to the main objective of such a scheme, has been the lack of financial protection and continuing high out-of-pocket expenditure for families and for women who utilize the scheme, and despite insurance coverage. So it has not enabled free hospital healthcare. Study after study has sort of provided evidence that people still incur expenses, and there is basically because the private sector does double billing, and despite all attempts for the women or the family to resist that, the private sector, hospital or the owner or the doctor is too powerful. And it's also not an issue of awareness. I mean, I just want to bring in this point that, there's a lot of discourse around, people should be made more aware, etc. But in all our conversations and studies, we found, women have tried to use their agency to fight with the hospital, to fight with the doctor, not, be overcharged. However, they sort of face a lot of problems and are able to, and are unable to, and have to again, have to finally pay it. So another impact that has happened, and with serious implications for women, has been that the prioritization of the scheme has led to the neglect of the public health system and primary health care. So while on the one hand, most of the money, like till last year, 75% of the insurance money went to the private sector. More of the budget money is also going to for insurance, putting other schemes related to women's health and primary health care at a lower priority. Even during COVID, we found that even though the government had packages under the scheme, the private hospitals refused to use these packages. The recent developments have been that, there's kind of a converging of private interests. So now the National Health Authority is also implementing the National Digital Health Mission. And they, along with the, main actor for PPP in the country, the Niti Aayog, is really also pushing for other PPPs, such as handing over of district hospitals, creating opportunities for hospitals to come up in smaller towns, private hospitals to come up in smaller towns, by giving them viability gap funding. And, so like it's sort of, all these things sort of just coming together and for more privatization of healthcare. And PHM India, Jan Swasthya Abhiyan and women's organizations are providing resistance, building evidence, documenting it, putting forward our demands, building perspectives of other health activists and other activists, writing articles and publications, and really bringing together similar experiences. So we really need to stay vigilant, document, scrutinize the evidence, and policy push towards such schemes in India and globally, and actually look at the narratives and discourses around it and what are the words. And of course, demand higher investment of strengthening the public sector, and also push for UHC to emphasize on public sector provisioning, and not to forget demand labor rights for frontline workers, majority of whom are women and who are providing the primary healthcare of the public system that we hope to improve. So we really need to build global solidarities on this issue, and conversations like this will help us. And thank you so much. And sorry for taking a bit more time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Lakshana for a very strong presentation and for reminding us about how the study of PPPs and our activism and research is also, activism and research, is also about the corporate capture of public policy and the corporate capture of development. Now we have the fortune to have Maria Jose Romero join us from Eurode's team. We're very glad to have Maria Jose comment on the cases and on this research in light of her extensive research on this topic. The floor is yours, Maria Jose.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Masaya, Corina, and everyone involved in the preparation of this session. I am very glad to be with you today. I will share some reflections in reaction to what we have just heard in relation to the case studies, building on the work that in the last 5 years I have conducted as part of Eurode, but also with partners, which also includes close collaboration with the scholars from North and South. And I will also include in my reflections some of the main highlights from the case studies that we have just heard. They are very rich. The three of them are very, very rich. So I encourage everyone to read them all. So first, I would like to share a very general comment that it's about the timing of this session. I think that this conversation about PPPs in the context of corporate capture of the development process is particularly timely. It is taking place when the world is thinking about the post-COVID-19 landscape. As we know, the pandemic has resulted in a deep recession with devastating social impact. It has also exacerbated failures previously identified by many in this virtual room and also part of our community, with great impact on women and the most vulnerable. The COVID crisis have also led to calls for ambitious responses, both in terms of scale and policies. And the broad headline of Building Back Better. However, in many cases, there is no critical discussion on what building back better actually means. And this is also the case with the issue of PPPs, that it's part of our session today, right? PPPs are having a central role in the post-COVID-19 context without this critical discussion on what they actually mean and what the implications of PPPs for inequalities are. So I think that the case studies shared today from colleagues in Mexico, India, and Ghana aim to contribute to this discussion from a political economy, a rights-based, and a feminist perspective, which is very, very welcome. So this is my very, very general comment that, not for obvious, it's something that we should not emphasize. Second, with regard to the general context, I also want to emphasize a couple of things that were mentioned by Corina at the very beginning. Because over the last decade, we have seen significant changes in global social policy, with implications for the state market nexus globally and also at the country level. And for strategies for universalization of provision, which are key for some of the discussions that we are having. The private sector has been placed at the heart of development strategies, and PPPs have been promoted as a key financing mechanism and policy tool to deliver public services. And with that promotion, we also have to bear in mind that three main things are also going on. First, there is an unwillingness of the donor community of developed countries to scale up international public finance and even to meet their ODA commitment. This unwillingness also covers the inability and unwillingness to agree on multilateral resolution to unsustainable sovereign debt, and to deal with tax avoidance and evasion effectively. Secondly, there is a repeated emphasis on the limitations of the public sector capacity to mobilize and to allocate resources for development in an efficient way, which has been fueled by austerity policies. And thirdly, this whole promotion of PPPs for service provision comes together with the fact that there is a mass of wealth in the hands of institutional private investors seeking stable and profitable investment opportunities. So here what we see is that development projects are an opportunity for profit making. And as Corina mentioned, this is a whole combo. This is a perverse logic that we have to challenge, right? That has to be exposed. So my third reflection links this point to the fact that we are in times of a private turn, a very strong private turn in development finance. Recently, even more reinforced by the pandemic. There has been a dramatic upscaling of global advocacy efforts in favor of PPPs and private finance, driven by the World Bank, as Corina mentioned, and other colleagues also mentioned, but also by developed countries, which are the home country of multinational companies and private investors, which are the ones benefiting from the implementation of this agenda. So the whole promotion of PPPs, the implementation of all these projects has to be situated in the broader tendencies of financialization of development. The cases presented use a political economy perspective in their analysis that cannot be ignored in our analysis of PPPs. With this promotion of PPPs, what we see is that there is state support domestically and internationally for the transformation of public services into private asset, which at the end of the day implies a shift that comes to the detriment of alternative practices and notions of public services and public goods framed by imperatives of access and quality for all. This is what is not there anymore. This is what we are missing. In my fourth comment, I would like to summarize in very general terms the main highlight of the case studies that we have just heard around 5 main points. The first one is that from what we have seen and also from other research on the issue of PPPs, PPPs fail to increase available government resources for gender responsive public services, as they often come as more expensive and carry more risks. And for citizens, they are also a very risky business, as they are not able to ensure that the rights are fulfilled. And for instance, it is clear in the presentation of our colleague from India that the PPPs there come as a threat to the right to health. Secondly, often efficiency gains come at a cost. And for example, as a result of lack of investment by the private sector partner to deliver services to an adequate standard, or by lowering costs, which in some cases mean hiring unqualified staff or cutting jobs. Third, private sector companies are accountable to their shareholders, not to citizens. And here, again, I don't want to say something that is very evident for us, but I think that it has to be said that it has proved very difficult to hold private actors to account, and that commitments on gender equality are a state responsibility, and they cannot be transferred to private companies. And this, in some cases, is what is going on when a PPP is in place. Fourth, a feminist approach to PPPs should not be restricted to a specific study to its impact on access to services for women or gender equality. Rather, they have to be assessed on the way that PPPs contribute or not to deepen structures and relations that commodify life and threaten the environment. Too often, PPPs promote a very narrow and managerial perspective on social services, like health, but also education, emphasizing measurable objectives and moving the debate away from a deeper feminist understanding of how to achieve transformative social and economic change. So with this comment, what I am trying to say is that it's very important to have this holistic and feminist approach to PPPs that is not about whether a particular project increase access to a particular service or not. And finally, I really want to emphasize the inherent contradiction between the quest for profit and the need to deliver social goals. The strong focus on identifying bankable projects limits the extent to which PPPs can proceed in areas which are not profitable without a state subsidy, right? And here it's also evident in the case of the example from colleagues in Mexico, that when we are in front of PPPs, we are in front of kind of projects that have very heavy bias in favor of mega projects, mega infrastructure projects that are often in opposition to the kind of infrastructure that serves local needs. In many cases, these type of mega infrastructure projects are the ones that come with lack of transparency, lack of meaningful public participation, as we have seen in these examples. Because the two, transparency and meaningful public participation, are seen as a burden instead of an intrinsic part of a project that is accountable and at the service of local communities. And to conclude, I would like to come back to the point of broader tendencies of financialization of development, because it's also important to mention, in my view, that the promotion of PPPs is having a great impact on development policies as a whole and public policies as a whole, over and above the particular PPP projects that are being implemented and the amount of projects that are being implemented. As some of the cases that were mentioned today also, I think that clearly illustrate the policy landscape at the national, but also at the global level, is being reimagined in terms of what might suit private investors, which is not exactly what serves people's needs and the needs of communities on the ground. So prevailing narratives that focus on the need to de-risk or attract private finance and to build national capacities to implement PPPs are the type of narratives that should be challenged, because are the type of narratives that are misleading in terms of what the real problem is and how to address the real problem. They are based on assumptions that private finance will come in support of people's needs, which, as we have seen in these 3 case studies, but also in many others, is actually not what is happening on the ground. So I will just finish saying that there is a need for a critical analysis that drives local and global struggles. And I really welcome this discussion. This session is just another important step in this collective process that we have ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Jose, for connecting the concrete cases to the large picture. I think that's very hard to do, and you did it in a great way. And I think it serves as a reminder of why this specific concrete research is important from a global lens. So now we have a period of questions and comments. As we mentioned earlier, because of the limitations of the platform, we cannot cede the mic, but we can follow questions and comments in the chat. So I invite all participants to pose your questions or comments to the panelists on the chat. And perhaps while we give some time for people to come forward with the comments, I could highlight a point and bring it back to you panelists to hear your reflections, and also see it as an opportunity for the authors to expand on some of the wealth of knowledge that they have been producing. One aspect that we highlight in the event for today, and also in your research, is resistance. So we are identifying all these problems, and each specific case is showing us the way these issues are experienced on the ground. And I think the 3 cases do a very strong job in that way. So I was wondering if you would like to expand on the role of resistance and women's resistance to these three specific cases, and perhaps more globally to you and Maria Jose and Corina as well. So perhaps we could start with Chifa, and we respect the order that we used earlier.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So the question of resistance came out very strongly in our case, but we want to see it in its segmented form. Resistance to the bigger project, which is the lockable shops, did not yield results. In fact, it's also part of the the resistance to the small shops, the stores that the government is building now, has decided to build now, is as a result of the misinformation and lack of consultation at the initial process of building the lockable shops. So we don't see women protesting at the initial stage of the PPPs. But as years passed, a few years passed, they've seen the full package. They began to understand what they were in for. And that is what led to the subsequent discussions about how are we going to pay for this? What's the sustainability structure of this? The other part is women asking the state to come back, and the state is back. We want to also see that in its context, that the spaces that the women occupied were the structures that they occupied before the PPPs came were built by them. Okay, so the state now takes over and builds those structures. It becomes state property. It's no longer for individual women. So we don't see that transition from grandmom to granddaughter going forward. So there's a truncation. They're going to truncate the women's transition, economic trajectory in that way. So although the women gained in making the state come back, there's consequence for them going forward, because even though I may own a small structure in the market, for me, I control what I sell in it. I control who I can hand it over to. But in the case of the new shares that the state is building, there's no guarantee that the women, in fact, they don't own it. The state owns it, and that is what we should think about critically. They've gained, but there's something they will be losing or they have lost in this process.
Thank you, Chifa. And maybe Isabel and Julieta, would you like to add something about the resistance to the large PPP process in Mexico?
Julieta, no? Well, I think that I believe that it's in the resistance process where we can find the keys to build an alternative political and economical proposal. Because as we said in the Mexican case, is in the process, in the organization process of the women defenders, where we can find the basis of a proposal, an alternative proposal. I want to mention that a phrase that I couldn't mention before because of the time, that maybe can illustrate this point, and is that we can, the phenomenon of capture or corporate capture of the state and territorial conflict in the framework of the environmental, social, and cultural impacts of projects and proposals for community resistance based on the sustainability of life. So we can use this social resistance to create a proposal and an agenda of against this PPP scheme. I don't know if Juli maybe wants to add something.
No, it's okay. That's the main point of the resistance, or the women defenders, of human rights defenders.
Thank you.
And Sulakshana?
Yeah. So I mean I did speak about, you know, individual resistance that women are putting up when they go with the families, and you know that is one part of it. But secondly, there's also a large network of health activists, at least with, I mean, also within the state that I'm in, and we've actually managed to create also a public discourse around, you know, I mean, people are around this issue, and also because people actually are, you know, clearly impacted, you know, from this. So they also, you know, from an individual standpoint, they also are very troubled and feel very exploited, you know, and especially in the private sector, you know, I mean, they have to sell their land or mortgage jewelry or take loans to pay the, you know, money for the hospital expenses to the private sector despite having insurance. So in fact, here the civil society had been able to make an impact even in the state government, in the, you know, the current government that changed in the state. They actually had to put public sector strengthening in their manifesto because there was such a big demand of you know, strengthening the public sector. Of course, at the national level, you know, I mean, you know, the space for civil society, I mean, I think the political you know, the climate also has to do with the amount of the kind of resistance, you know, that you put up. So I think that's, you know, another issue. I wanted to, because for the question that Elaine has, so, you know, in sense of health insurance is something, social protection is something that trade unions have always asked for workers. However, like, you know, I mean, very similar to what Maria Jose was saying, but progressive trade unions who are part of the People's Health Movement in India understand that it's not about just getting that service. It's about, you know, whether, you know, it's reinforcing the existing power structures, the existing, you know, power dynamics. So, and if it is, then, you know, that's not something, you know, that even they want. So as part of PHM India, the progressive trade unions are part of this resistance. I just want to say a last thing in terms of also a caution. I think in the civil society space, I mean, there are many who are also, you know, you see a lot of vested interests, and you see, you know, the same philanthrocapitalist sort of funding, you know, research and even projects. I mean, in India, we see they're doing it for both insurance and digital health because they are like, you know, now merged together. And so I think we have to globally also stay vigilant across sectors, and, you know, about even within the civil society, you know, who is saying what, and maybe using the same words, but it may not really mean the same things. So, yeah, thanks.
So Lakshana was responding to a question posed by Elaine on the chat. I'm not sure the rest of the panelists had a chance to see it. She asks if there is a growth in pressure from labor and trade unions to resist corporate capture, and if trade unions are leading or informing social movements in this regard.
May I come in this point?
Please.
Yeah, on the issue of resistance, and I would like to link with this question. Something that we also learned from the cases is how resistances are built beyond the the institutional spaces that sometimes are open for the participation of people, of citizens. In the case of Mexico, for example, there were these, I don't know if the word in English is public audiences, consultancy spaces where people can go and interact with the private sector, the state, etc. And they were really fake, and this is usually the case. They are fake spaces for citizens monitoring and consultancy. And in the case of Mexico, it's clear how organizations in the field reject to be part of those processes, and the resistances are built beyond that. And the other issue I wanted to highlight also was the important thinking more on the global space, global activism, the importance that these issues are penetrate the feminist agenda. I think we are doing so, and I think because the consequences of PPPs are felt in the field, it is so important to bring concrete cases. And I think this is one of the very valuable value added of this project, that we have cases, we have the voices of the people in the ground, and we can build global resistance and global activism from the cases. You know, they are not just slogans, it is concrete experience from people in the ground. And my last point, to go to the question brought by Elaine, there are two other cases that were not part of the panel, the one in Zimbabwe and the one in Peru. They were also on the health sector, and the two experiences brought the example of how nurses in one case, doctors in another, organize themselves to resist the worsening of their working conditions because of the PPPs operating the health facilities. So yes, there is also resistance from the trade unions, even because they are really affected by the PPPs project.
Just to add to that point, I'm also thinking about not only how the trade unions are resisting on a principle basis, but also because often workers are exploited through the PPP process. And again, the Zimbabwean case shows, and I'm sorry we're discussing that one, but you can see a summary of the case in the DAWN forms that is available today, where ward nurses, for example, were working on state salaries for private health provision. And this is not exclusive to the Zimbabwean case, but it's kind of a common practice. And also the nurses unions in Fiji were also are also at the forefront of the resistance to the PPP model. So certainly that was an excellent point to highlight, Elaine. I was wondering if anyone else would like to address the question of resistance and labor unions. Go ahead, Maria Jose.
Yeah, thank you. It is indeed a very relevant question that also goes to the point of how our community, or how this community also engage with the issue of PPPs on a more systematic basis, and goes, as Corina said, from case studies to challenging the global promotion of PPPs that translate into national dynamics in a different way. And here what I want to mention is that I have experienced how the issue of PPPs, the impacts, the negative impacts of PPPs are more and more high on the agenda of women's organizations, but also trade unions, working international level, but also at the global level. And I definitely remember some of our first meetings and first exchanges on all these back in 2015 and 16 and from there onwards, right? And I think that the work that we are jointly doing at the UN level, at the level of multilateral development banks, European institutions, etc., has to be the result of this joint work in which we reflect what are the issues going on the ground. And this is very, very important. And Public Service International is one of our partners in this work, as DAWN, Feminist, and NAWI in Africa, and other organizations from both North and South. And this is something that for sure, it's a long journey, but I think that has to be enriched by these type of discussions and the work that we are jointly doing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Another point that has been coming through in the different studies and the interventions that you've been making today is what it means to have a feminist lens when we're talking about PPPs. What do we mean when we talk about having a feminist perspective, or even when we're talking about a gender analysis? And this is an important discussion to be had in a context of pinkwashing, and when the word gender has been mainstreamed to a point that has often lost its meaning. So I would like to invite you all to comment on what it means from the research that you've been conducting and on these cases and on this issue at large, what it means to work with a feminist lens and why.
May I? I think we have already said something about that, but I would like to highlight first this idea of intersectional holistic approach. I think this is very feminist, and I think with this perspective we managed to bring different, more partial approaches that maybe other critical views are developing, but I think the feminist head have this ability to put all the pieces together to find the links. And for me, the second issue that makes an approach really feminist is to be based on people's concrete everyday life experience, and this is especially what the cases bring. The pictures that Chifa was showing us of the market in Ghana, people were there. They are not numbers. They are people, and the voices of women have been brought by the cases, and I think that is also a very feminist feature of the approach.
Matsa, if I can add.
Yes, please.
So I think, also sort of questioning, commercialized market-based, strategies and, things that, I mean, clearly the corporate and the government are very fond of. And instead putting forward strategies, interventions built on solidarity and human rights, and ensuring that the most vulnerable are being reached. So I think that's also something I feel as a feminist analysis is important. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, I don't see any more comments on the chat, so I may bring a new question to share with you all before we close the seminar in 10 minutes. I think one key aspect that a political economy perspective on PPPs brings is the issue of power. And this is not a technical concern, and it plays out in local and also in global terms. Perhaps the work that we have been carrying out collectively with these cases is kind of creating different ways to link both the local to the global and in both directions to see how these power relations play out. So the issue of power, I would like to invite you to highlight on how power relations have been changed or affecting the way development is being governed in each of the three cases and globally as well. I may help a little bit by thinking, or I'll just bring Maria Jose in. Welcome, Maria Jose.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very relevant question to what we are discussing now. I want to share with you some reflections in relation to this question that goes to the point of thinking that in the prevailing and the narrative that is going on these days is one that is strongly focused on the need to build national capacities to implement PPPs. And the fact that national governments have to be advised by the World Bank and by developed country partners, so to say, on how they should be doing their development project, how they should be implementing this and financing their projects. And I think that this is a quite perverse power dynamic, because they arrive in a particular country with a set of prescriptions that are the ones that they want to apply in almost every country, that are the ones that focus on open your market, regulate in such a way that benefits private capital, because it's with private capital that you will deliver the services that your people need. And this is, as again, quite perverse and not exactly in response to what people need. It's also a power dynamic that does not allow for a contract, a social contract between the state and its citizens, because it's all the time mediated by this belief that national governments are not able to deliver in the public interest. And they have to be supported and they have to be advised on how to do things. And of course, there is a need to build capacity, but probably not for the same objective and not for the same purpose, because there is a need to strengthen the social contract with the state and with government, but this has to be built on accountability at the national level and a different way of doing things. And again, in response to your question, I think that there are very perverse power dynamics at the national level that in this particular moment of crisis, it's playing out quite in a way that does not benefit citizens. Thank you.
Yeah, Masaya. So I just want to say that I completely agree with what Maria Jose is saying, because, you know, we now have this proliferation of strategic purchasing agencies, you know, building capacities of governments to purchase for strategic purchasing. And in fact, a lot of some of the departments, both at the WHO and plus a lot of the other sort of private and other agencies are really funding such sort of, strategic purchasing, capacity building agencies. And I completely agree. And I mean, it's very interesting because they say that, you know, purchasing is, you know, they say purchasing is easier than providing, which is really not case, you know. I mean, providing is a much simpler task, and, you know, you have things under your control. And when you have to, you know, get something done from the private sector and ensure that they do it correctly, it's so much more complicated. And there's a whole lot of other power relations that come into that. And I also want to say that, you know, I just also want to highlight the issue of conflict of interest. So again, so a lot of the powerful guys are also part of a lot of these expert committees and government policy making. So I think that's another thing, and one has to keep an eye on. And lots of times it's quite non-transparent. You have, you know, you have no idea what's going on.
Here we have two comments from Crystal and Elaine. First, Crystal saying again that she agrees with MJ's and Maria Jose's comments regarding the narrative that permeates this narrative, how this narrative permeates the citizenship or citizenry, sorry, in terms of what can or cannot be provided by the state. And here Elaine also comments about the concern about the search in vulture capitalism and how businesses can take advantage of this process through land foreclosures and hedge fund entities. So again, this brings this very concrete model to a global dynamic that is of central concern for us. Maybe if there is no other comment, I'd like to invite maybe Corina to have one final word.
Sure, we are coming to the time, and this virtual space will close suddenly. So before that happens, I would like to thank again to everyone in this meeting, people who are in the audience and also contribute with their comments, to the panelists today, to the authors that were not part of the panel, but that also provided very rich work that is available for now in the form of the DAWN forms. We will continue letting you know when other type of publications are available. And I think, as Maria Jose said, this is another step in this networking and deepening our analysis on PPPs and on corporate capture more broadly. We are a very big challenge ahead to challenge the narrative and to claim for a transformative view, which is not this one that is being pushed. And I want to thank a lot Masaya for having taken us through these 2 hours of conversation, and I give the floor back to you for the closing.
Thank you. Well, there's not much more to say than thank you for everybody for attending. Thank you for each one of the authors that have contributed to this process that includes the 3 cases that we studied today and we talked about today, but also 7 other cases in the rest of the Global South that I commend you to read. They're very rich cases now in the format of the DAWN forms, and later in a larger, more in-depth format. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to continuing building networks of resistance together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you.
Abrazos.
Abrazos. Bye-bye.